God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Que l'on ouvre les portes. Let the doors be open. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The Honourable Member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, April is World Autism Month, and I know we are all committed to creating a kinder, more inclusive world for individuals with autism. Events such as Autism on the Hill and the annual unveiling of the Faces of Autism banner have been unfortunately postponed, and many other events held virtually. Autism organizations have had to adopt, but nonetheless remain steadfast on calling for the creation of a national autism strategy, which I fully support. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say that Budget 2021 provides funding for the creation of a national autism strategy. Consultations will include autistic Canadians, families, and stakeholders such as Autism Speaks or the Shining Through Centre for Children in my riding of Vaughan Woodbridge. This broad and inclusive engagement process will help streamline diagnosis and treatment for Canadians with autism spectrum disorder. I encourage Vaughan Woodbridge constituents to find out more through the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. Together we will build a country that is truly inclusive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure every Canadian's been looking forward to brighter days and warmer weather. In Cypress Hills Grasslands, we started to see another welcome sign of spring. The farmers are heading out to begin seeding their crops. While driving in different parts of our rural riding, I'm always happy to see their machinery out in the fields. It brings back fond memories of growing up and working on our family farm, and it's an encouraging display of their extraordinary effort. Personally, I find it hard to give a better example of dependability than our farmers. In a second year of everyone feeling surrounded by uncertainty and instability, we can look to them for encouragement. These farmers know exactly how to get through good times and bad, facing unpredictable seasons and conditions. One way or another, they always find a way to get the job done and make sure the rest of us have food on our tables. To the farmers in the Southwest and across Canada, I wish you all the best, and here's to a bumper crop this year from Plant 21. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Oakville North Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every April 28th, on the National Day of Mourning, we remember those who were injured or lost their lives on the job. Every worker has the right to return home safely at the end of each workday. The last year has highlighted the need for safe workplaces more than ever. Working together to fight for improved workplace health and safety, we have seen injury rates decline in recent years, but workplace deaths still remain high. In pre-pandemic days, we would gather in Oakville on the day of mourning at the Memorial on Navy Street at an event organized by the Oakville and District Labor Council, or at the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 793 Memorial. While we cannot gather in person, we will continue to work together to honor and reflect on the thousands of lives forever changed and to renew our commitment to workplace health and safety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'Honorable Député.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has limited members in their usual activities on the ground. However, thanks to exceptional organizations, I've been able to stay in touch with seniors in my riding. We all know that they are the ones who have suffered the most during the pandemic. They have been isolated since last March. They are the most affected by the wave of deaths, and they are the ones who have been most left behind by federal assistance. We must appropriately honor the hard work of seniors organizations in La Prairie. Despite the pandemic, they have kept a close relationship with their members to ensure that they continue to experience well-being despite the isolation. I'd like to thank the Maison des Aînés, the Café Liberté 50, the Club Idéal, and various seniors organizations in Delson, La Prairie, Saint-Constant, Saint-Philippe, Candiac, and Saint-Mathieu. I'm looking forward to being able to participate in future activities, and I hope that these organizations keep on doing their great work. The Honourable Member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, on April 19th, this government presented a historic budget. First of all, It was historic because for the first time in the history of Canada, a female Minister of Finance did something incredible to break the glass ceiling by presenting this budget. And the budget is historic because it is full of measures to help us beat the pandemic, emerge strong from the recession, and build a better future. For all Canadians, community organizations and businesses, we can all be happy about what's in this budget. As the member for Bourassa, I am particularly happy about investments to fight family violence, build housing, support mental health, help community organizations modernize. And I'm also happy about the significant support for Black Canadians. Mr. Speaker, as our government knows, thanks to this budget, we will be able to emerge stronger from this pandemic. Thank you.
Honourable Member for West Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week was National Volunteer Week, and I want to take a moment today to sincerely thank all of the incredible volunteers throughout West Nova who have contributed their time, energy, and talent over the past year to give back to those in need. Rain or shine, our local volunteers have always been very generous with their time, whether it was lending a helping hand to seniors, food banks, people living with a disability, or even single parents. Volunteers had always had their back, no matter what. As a public servant, it's important to me to recognize and honor the many volunteers in our communities as they are essential and make a difference in our lives. And a special congratulations to the provincial recipients in our riding. Daryl Crosby in Yarmouth, Daryl Crosby in Argyll, Mike Randall in Yarmouth, Tim McKinnon in the town of Yarmouth, Josiane Deveau in Clare, Megan Robinson in Digby, Al Dupuy in the town of Digby, Ginny Prowl in Annapolis County, Sarah White in town of Berwick, and Heather Morse in Kings County. While this is only a short list of volunteers honored by our towns and municipalities, there's hundreds of folks that deserve our great admiration. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thunder Bay, Rainy River.
I'd like to pay tribute to my friend Marcel Negro, who passed away a few weeks ago. Marcel used to work for Children's Aid. He refused to go into administration, preferring to work with children on the street. Kids gravitated to him, trusted him. He was always sympathetic, always had time to listen, and always tried to help these kids out, whether it was to help to try to get them back together with their parents or to help them find a place to live. He gave kids his cell number, and if they called him even at 1 a.m. and they needed his help, he was out the door. A prominent member of Thunder Bay's great Italian community, Marcel really loved to entertain, to cook, to serve a good meal, and perhaps afterwards to enjoy a glass of wine with his guests. Marcel, however, will best be remembered for the kind of person he was. He was always an ocean of calm, always good-natured, and always concerned about others rather than himself. Marcel will sadly be missed by his wife, Lena, his brothers, and many other people here in Thunder Bay. Although I've met wealthier Canadians and more prominent Canadians, I have to say I want to talk about him here in Parliament because I've seldom met a better or more decent Canadian. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Long Range Mountains.
Mr. Speaker, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are no strangers to stepping up to help others in times of crisis, and this week is no different. I was so proud yesterday when I saw 9 healthcare professionals step up and step on a military aircraft to fly to Ontario to get to work to support their stressed and overworked colleagues in the Toronto University Health Network. That group included Bonnie Chalk of Deer Lake in my riding of the Long Range Mountains. Our province and our residents have done a great job of keeping the COVID-19 pandemic under control, and now that allows our healthcare heroes to help others in their time of need. This pandemic is pushing doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, and everyone involved in healthcare to their limits across the country, however, especially in Ontario. It's clear that part of our Canadian family needed help, and that's what these incredible individuals are doing. They're helping their colleagues in need. To Bonnie and all the healthcare professionals who headed from my province to Ontario yesterday, on behalf of all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and I'm sure I can speak for all in this House, thank you and stay safe.
The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Mr. Speaker, people in my riding of Langley Aldergrove are tired of the pandemic, now more than a year old, too old, and they're ready to get life back to normal, back to work, back to school, back to family gatherings, back to church, hopefully a summer vacation, and in September back to university on campus. As we look to turning the corner on COVID-19, Canada stands at a crossroads, and we must choose a path to recovery. Will it be the security and stability offered by the Conservative Party, or a reimagined Canada, an idea floated by the Liberals? This Liberal government would use the opportunity of a crisis to try the social experiment on reshaping Canada in their own image. Conservatives, on the other hand, have a proven track record of steering Canada through the last recession, and today we stand ready, willing and able to roll up our sleeves, do the hard work, getting Canada back, getting our economy secure, and getting life back to normal, what we all want.
L'honorable député de Gatineau.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau. Mr. Speaker, this year, the Carrefour de la Miséricorde, an organization in my riding which helps single mothers and their children, is celebrating its 40th anniversary. The organization was founded in 1980 by the Sisters of Mercy. Every year, it helps more than 60 mothers and their children. It offers a warm, open, and accessible space. It offers individual support and group activities, and these services support mothers in their parenting role and helps them to develop or consolidate the mother-child bond. On 2 occasions, I was lucky enough to be the honorary chair of their annual lobster dinner that is used for funding the activities. This year, the lobster dinner will take place on May 28th, 29th in the form of takeout boxes, which are available still for $70. Since I was elected in 2015, I have been a great admirer of the hard work of this organization, and I'd like to thank the volunteers and staff of the organization. Thank you and good luck.
For Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years in the making, the long-awaited Liberal budget is a serious letdown. Seniors have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and for those seniors who were already struggling to make ends meet, this pandemic has added financial constraint. Conservatives called for increased financial supports for low-income seniors in the budget. Unfortunately, the proposed OAS increase does nothing to support low-income seniors under the age of 75. I share in the disappointment of those seniors who were excluded. It's time that this government made them a priority. What is even more concerning is the Liberal budget's failure to deliver a real plan to open up our economy. Without it, their massive deficit spending threatens the long-term viability of important social programs like that of OAS and GIS. Mr. Speaker, only Conservatives have a plan to secure jobs and secure a future for all Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, today is the National Day of Mourning for all those who have died or suffered illness or injury in the workplace. In a year where so many have been deeply affected by workplace tragedy because of the pandemic, commemorating this day is more important than ever. For our healthcare workers who have battled COVID-19 and their patients and amongst themselves, to long-term care workers who have suffered along those for whom they care, we mourn with you. Your service cannot be appreciated enough. For all those families who are suffering due to any workplace tragedy, we carry your grief in our hearts. In Sarnia-Lambton and across the country, Steps for Life is raising funds and awareness for families suffering from workplace tragedy. I want to commend them for all the work they're doing to provide support for those who've been affected by injury in the workplace. Today is a day to remember those we have lost, keeping them in our thoughts as we strive to make the future safer for workers across Canada. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Women in Canada are on the front lines of the COVID-19 battle. In the care economy and as essential workers, women have had to bear the brunt of both the disease and the economic impacts of public health measures. Women are more likely to get sick and more likely to lose their income because of the pandemic. Universal childcare will contribute to women's recovery, but it is not enough. We also need strong workplace protections, including paid sick leave, elder care, the right to refuse unsafe work, and finally, a national pharmacare plan. On this National Day of Mourning, we remember those whom we have lost, and we fight for those who are still here, on the front lines, in schools and hospitals, in care homes, in stores and in restaurants. Anything less is a betrayal of working women in Canada. One life lost at work is one too many.
L'honorable député de Thérèse de Blainville.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, today is the 28th of April, the National Day of Mourning for workers who lost their lives or were injured in workplace accidents. Every week, a Quebec worker dies in the workplace. Nearly 95,000 people have fallen victim this year. Every victim constitutes a tragedy, but in the current pandemic, I am thinking particularly about health workers. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I want to honor the memory of health workers who lost their lives while trying to save the lives of others. I would like to pay tribute to the work of these men and women, mainly women, who fell ill while trying to protect our loved ones from COVID-19. When we get through this terrible time together, Quebec will remember that for more than a year, you went into danger every day to protect all of us. Thank you so much.
The Honourable Member for Kenora.
Mr. Speaker, it is without question that this pandemic has been difficult for constituents in my riding of Kenora and indeed all Canadians. This past year has made clear the mental health crisis that we face. And that is why, as we work to secure our future, Canada's Conservatives will ensure that supporting mental health would be a key pillar of our recovery from COVID-19. We will restructure how we support and fund mental health by enacting a national action plan. This includes boosting funding to the provinces and territories for mental health care, providing incentives to employers to provide mental health coverage, and creating a nationwide 3-digit suicide prevention hotline. Mr. Speaker, it is time we treat mental health with the seriousness it deserves and provide Canadians with the support that they deserve. That is what Canadians need, and that is exactly what our party will deliver. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Mr. Speaker, during this holy month of Ramadan, I rise today to pay tribute to a trailblazer from Scarborough, the late Danish Memon. Danish was a community builder, a dedicated community leader, entrepreneur, and mentor to countless young people in Scarborough and beyond. Sadly, Danish struggled with mental health and ultimately took his own life. Recently, Ahmed Ismail and Janella Massa, 2 Scarborough trailblazers, hosted a virtual online event seen all around the world to acknowledge Danish's work and his impact in our community. They highlighted the necessity of challenging stigmas of mental health and ensuring proper mental health supports are available to all, and especially those from marginalized communities. I want to thank his wife, Yasmin Merchant, and his children, Usama, Mariam, Safia, and Amaya, for their extraordinary courage in sharing their story so publicly. Thank you, Brother Danish, for your inspiring work. We miss you, and we honor you, your legacy, and your family today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Hear, hear. Monsieur le Président, hier...
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister said that no one in his office was aware of a Me Too allegation against General Vance. No one. But that was not the truth, Mr. Speaker, because many emails show that it was quite the contrary. Was the Prime Minister wrong? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, bullying, sexual harassment, and sexual assault affect far too many women and men in our armed forces, and that's unacceptable. As a government, we've taken measures to have better support for anyone who comes forward. In Budget 2021, we announced more than $236 million to eliminate gender-based violence in the armed forces and to eliminate all forms of harassment and to create a safe and supportive workplace. We will have more announcements coming soon. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
In 2014, the Prime Minister said this: "I am aware of how difficult it is for people to come forward. I believe strongly that those of us in positions of authority have a duty to act upon allegations of this nature." He said that before firing 2 of his MPs for sexual misconduct allegations, Mr. Speaker. He acted then, but hasn't acted for 3 years after direct allegations were brought forward by a woman serving her country in uniform. Why did the Prime Minister fail in his duty to her?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, this government has always taken seriously the responsibility to support and provide resources and follow up with anyone who comes forward with allegations of sexual misconduct or assault in the armed forces or otherwise. In Budget 2021, we announced over $236 million to eliminate sexual misconduct and gender-based violence in the CAF, including money to enhance internal support services to survivors and implement new external oversight mechanisms. This builds on work we're already doing, including a strategy for long-term culture change to eliminate sexual misconduct and an implementation of the Declaration of Victims' Rights.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister's talking about work he's going to do. What about the work he failed to do for 3 years, Mr. Speaker? He said he didn't know the specific nature of the allegations, yet his office on multiple occasions in March 2018 described the complaint as one of sexual harassment. His chief of staff knew, the clerk of the Privy Council, everyone around the Prime Minister knew, but he suggested he didn't know it was a Me Too style complaint. Is the Prime Minister going to stand in this House and tell the women of this country that he doesn't think sexual harassment is a Me Too complaint?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the leader of the official opposition is decrying the process that we followed in this case back in 2018, but it was exactly the same process followed in 2015 by the then Conservative government. The leader of the official opposition, who was then Associate Minister of Defence, heard a rumour of misconduct, told his staff, who told PMO and the Privy Council office. The job of politicians and their staff is to ensure any allegation is given to the appropriate authorities. It is a little rich that the leader of the official opposition continues to decry a process that he took himself when he was in government.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, none of that is true, and it's sad to see the Prime Minister trying to shirk his responsibility that he said in 2014 was his duty before he fired 2 of his own MPs with just an allegation. In fact, a month before the Ombudsman allegation, he had to fire his top Quebec lieutenant in his office, his personal advisor, for sexual misconduct allegations. His office was even looking at further allegations with respect to sexual misconduct. Did the fact that his office was preoccupied with allegations of his own team lead him to give General Vance a pass?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the examples highlighted by the Leader of the Opposition goes to demonstrate the very point we have been making as a government over the past 5 years, that we always take allegations of misconduct, of harassment, or intimidation, or assault extremely seriously, that we follow proper processes, that we ensure there is support and resources there for anyone who comes forward. We know that within the Canadian Armed Forces there is much work still to do to support the women and men who step forward, and we will continue to do just that.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
There's much work for the Prime Minister to do, Mr. Speaker, because he failed. For 3 years, he did not act, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Defence knew about sexual harassment allegations. His top senior advisor, his Chief of Staff knew. The Privy Council office knew. There was a timeline created, emails sent about sexual harassment, and yesterday the Prime Minister has the gall to suggest that he didn't know the specific nature of the allegations. He either isn't being straight with Canadians, Mr. Speaker, or his Chief of Staff chose to cover it up and keep him in the dark. Will he fire his Chief of Staff?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yet again, the Conservatives won't let the facts get in the way of a good political argument. If the member opposite had been listening to committee, he would have heard from the multiple witnesses for 3 months, including non-partisan public servants, that the details of the allegation were unknown. The record is clear. The Deputy Secretary of Cabinet testified, "I did not have information even about the nature of the complaint or specifics that would have enabled further action." The former Ombudsman testified at committee that he could not provide any details. He said, "I took the investigation as far as I could with the complainant's authority." This highlights why we need a better system for people to feel safe coming forward.
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, when it comes to the Port of Montreal, there it is urgent that we get Quebec's economy back on track. And there are issues that have to do with scheduling. Now, does the special law deal with what the employer did on April 9th? The parliamentary secretary told us that the content of the law meant that any unilateral modifications made by either party in April 2021 were excluded. So I understand that this has to do with workplace scheduling. And can the Prime Minister confirm that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Port of Montreal plays a central role in the Canadian economy, but particularly Quebec's economy. The current work stoppage is causing serious delays that could last for a long time yet. This is not a decision that we took lightly. We believe in the negotiation process. That's why we've been working with the parties for 2 years. We made this decision only after having had exhausted all other options. We hope that we will be able to move forward together for Quebec and Canada. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, I won't act as though he didn't understand the question. And I won't act like he doesn't want to answer the question. My question is, now, this special law is coming after 2 years, but they really did nothing up until then. They waited until the first day of the strike. Now, does this special legislation have to do with the workplace scheduling that was imposed unilaterally by the employer on April 9th? The assistant to the Minister of Labour says that that was the case. So can the Prime Minister say yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's important for us to look at the facts. Since October 2018, the Federal Mediation Service facilitated over 100 days of bargaining. Furthermore, my colleagues communicated with both parties a number of times to encourage them to work with mediators in order to find an agreement. So, will the Bloc Québécois help us unblock the port and Quebec's economy by allowing us to resume work there? Will they help us set up a neutral arbitration process to resolve the dispute and arrive at a new collective agreement? The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Day of mourning, a day we reflect on those who lost their lives while going to work, and the fact that no worker should ever lose their life going to work. And one of the things the experts agree, one way we can protect workers so they don't get sick when they go to work is better paid sick leave. This is something we've been long calling for the Prime Minister to fix. We know that better paid sick leave will save lives, so will the Prime Minister finally do the job of improving paid sick leave so we can save lives, so workers don't go into work sick, and we can protect them and their families?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Every day, but particularly on this National Day of Mourning, we recognize the essential workers that are on the front lines of this crisis. They should never have to make the choice between going into work sick or putting food on the table. That's why we brought in the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit with up to 4 weeks of income support for people who are unable to work because they are sick or need to self-isolate. But we know that employer leave is the most direct support for workers. Effective September 2019, workers in federally regulated workplaces and industries have access to paid leave to treat an injury or illness. In parenthesis, the NDP voted against that, but we will now work with the provinces so they can bring it in their jurisdictions.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The Prime Minister knows very well that we have a federal program that experts agree is simply not working. It needs to be improved. And this is about saving lives. Workers are going into work sick. It's not a question if they are or they're not. They are. And when they go into work sick, they risk infecting their colleagues. Their families then end up getting sick. We can prevent all of that. In fact, Australia and New Zealand have some form of national paid sick leave that works. So will the Prime Minister get the job done, improve paid sick leave to protect workers and save lives?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, we see the NDP completely befuddled about the division of powers in Canada and the things that are responsibility for the provinces and the things that are responsibility for the federal government. The federal government moved forward on a sick leave that people can directly apply to, but we agree that the best way to work a sick leave is for people to get it through their employers. That's why we brought in federal sick leave back in 2019, which the NDP voted against, and that's why we are working with the provinces and encouraging them to bring in employer sick leave in the provincially regulated industries, which is most of our workforce.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
When it comes to sexual harassment claims against Canada's top soldier and the fact that he believed he was untouchable and had Canada's top politicians under his control, as Vance did, the buck always stops with the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister is positioning Katie Telford to take the blame. Lord knows she's not the first woman he's thrown under the bus. But isn't it true that when the Prime Minister says he believes women, what he actually means is he's going to be covering up for the boys?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to see the member opposite highlight the responsibilities of the Prime Minister in these issues because there were questions and allegations about General Vance before he was even appointed to the position of Chief of Defence Staff under the previous Prime Minister, in which the leader of the official opposition was Associate Minister of Defence. We know that there were follow-ups, there were investigations, and they chose to move forward nonetheless. We moved forward with processes back in 2018 that weren't able to come through because the complainant did not want more information disclosed.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Well, he is one of the boys. He knows these women who are overly sensitive and emotional and just experience things differently. The fact is, in March 2018, the Prime Minister knew the incident of him inappropriately groping a young woman in 2008 was going to be revealed, and he was going to have to explain for that. So, isn't it true the real reason the Prime Minister covered up for General Vance is because he knew he had skeletons he was going to have to deal with?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the respect and the support that this government has demonstrated every step of the way for people who come forward with stories of allegations, with experiences of mistreatment is consistent and will continue to be what we stand for. That the official opposition needs to stoop to the level of disgusting personal attacks is yet another example of the loss they feel of being even slightly relevant at a time when there is a pandemic where the solutions are based on science, at a time where a government has demonstrated through a budget that we are there for Canadians. All they can do is sling mud.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Oh, now the Prime Minister is the victim. Give me a break. The fact is the Prime Minister and his government covered up serious allegations of sexual misconduct against the Chief of the Defence Staff, and now he's covering up his cover-up by saying he didn't know. It's just not believable. What's believable is this. The Prime Minister only pretends to be a feminist, when in fact he's at the top of the old boys club. Just a wink and a nudge. Don't worry, boys, your secret is safe with him. Isn't that the truth?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, that is not the truth. The committee has heard from multiple witnesses for 3 months, including non-partisan public servants, that the details of the allegation were unknown. The record is clear. The Deputy Secretary of Cabinet testified, quote, "I did not have information even about the nature of the complaint or specifics that would have enabled further action." The former ombudsman testified at committee that he could not provide any details. He said, quote, "I took the investigation as far as I could with the complainant's authority." We need a better system to better support complainants coming forward.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, in 2018, a woman in the Canadian Armed Forces made allegations of sexual misconduct against a military's top officer. The Prime Minister says that his office took these allegations seriously, except that many people in the Prime Minister's inner circle knew about them but did nothing. The Minister of Defence, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. And the Prime Minister is trying to make us believe that he didn't know. Was he or was he not aware of the allegations? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The honourable member is wrong. The committee heard from multiple witnesses over the course of 3 months, including non-partisan officials, and they said that the details, or rather the nature of the allegation, was unknown. One of them said, and I quote, "I didn't even have information about the nature of the complaint or any details that would have allowed us to take additional steps." The former mediator testified and said that he couldn't provide any details and said, "I took the investigation as far as I could with the complainant's authorization." Now that's why we need a better system. The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul. Mr. Speaker, when a woman comes forward with a sexual harassment complaint, she shouldn't suffer any negative consequences. She should be listened to and should feel safe. But the Prime Minister failed. Can he imagine how a woman who is harassed by her superior feels when she's completely ignored once she dares to come forward? It's a nightmare, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware of the message that he is sending to women who have been sexually harassed? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as we've been saying from the very beginning, we will be there to support, to listen to, and to provide resources to anyone who comes forward with sexual misconduct allegations. We've taken concrete steps as a government over the years, but it's clear, Mr. Speaker, that we have more to do, and we will have more to announce soon concerning stronger measures that will support anyone serving in the Canadian Armed Forces who deserve to be better supported than they currently are. The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and his government say that they're serious about having zero tolerance for sexual harassment, but they gave General Vance a pay raise after the allegations. This seems to be the way of the old boys club. As a woman, I find it very disappointing. The Prime Minister is failing women who believe in his so-called feminist government. How can he call himself a feminist when he's failing the women in our military? How? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for years we've been making investments to improve the culture of the military and to improve things for those who are victims of sexual harassment within the military. We know that we need to do more, and that's exactly what we will continue to do. We have always been there as a government, as a feminist government, to support women, and we will continue to do so. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand. On April 9th, the employer imposed a decision which now this special legislation would reverse. So the outcome of the story was foretold. The Prime Minister could end the strike today. The Port of Montreal would reopen tomorrow, and that would save tens of thousands of dollars. That's what everyone wants. And he says anything except actually an actual answer to the question. Why? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for years, we have been saying that we believe that the best solutions are those that can be found around the bargaining table. That's why we have long supported the work happening between employer and employees, and we will continue to support that work. But in the face of a crisis that could have extremely negative consequences for our economy and for workers and citizens of Quebec, we had to take action. We don't want to impose working conditions. Rather, the goal was to impose neutral arbitration that would lead to a solution. That's why we took action. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, I understand, Mr. Speaker. The proof that the government thinks that we need to resolve this by a negotiation is that they're coming forward with a special law. It just makes no sense. The union asked the employer whether they agreed that they should cancel the decision of April 9th, and they said, well, we'll tell you after we see the special legislation. So this is all just a setup whose intention was to come forward with a special bill in the first place. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, we can see that the Bloc Québécois is always there to defend the interests of Quebec with a lot of empty rhetoric. But the Bloc can't actually settle for empty rhetoric here, because here they have the option of taking action. So will they support a bill that would allow us to safely reopen and resume activities at the port, that would set up a neutral arbitration process to resolve the dispute, and that would then lead to a new collective agreement? Will they allow the port to reopen and get Quebec's economy going again?
For Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can't keep his story straight. First, he said he learned of the allegations of sexual misconduct against General Vance in the media. Then he said he just didn't know the specific details. Now he's saying he didn't know it was a Me Too complaint, even though the senior staff in his office, including the Prime Minister's chief of staff, were using the term sexual harassment. So pick your poison, Mr. Speaker. Did Katie Telford lie to the Prime Minister about the severity of the complaint? Or has the Prime Minister been misleading Canadians?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can understand how desperate the Conservatives are to fall back on attacks. Instead of talking about a budget that is there to support Canadians through this issue, and instead of talking about the COVID crisis and the science that is going to get us through, instead they're choosing to neglect what the committee itself has put forward from multiple witnesses, that the details of the allegation were unknown. The Deputy Secretary of Cabinet testified, quote, "I did not have information even about the nature of the complaint or specifics that would have enabled further action." The former ombudsman testified to committee that he couldn't provide any details and took the investigation as far as he could with the complainant's authority.
Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is forgetting that we've had multiple witnesses, including the Ombudsman, including the clerk to the Cabinet, all saying that it was sexual misconduct in nature and have it in emails. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and his own senior advisor, Elder Marquez, exchanged emails in March of 2018 discussing sexual harassment allegations against General Vance. Mr. Marquez told the Defense Committee that even Katie Telford's assistant knew about the allegations, but somehow the Prime Minister wants us to believe he was left in the dark. Is the Prime Minister telling us that the assistant to his Chief of Staff was aware of serious allegations against Canada's top soldier, but somehow the Prime Minister of Canada wasn't?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we put forward a number of processes over the past years to strengthen and encourage the supports for anyone coming forward with allegations of mistreatment, of harassment, assault, intimidation, or anything. We know we need to strengthen that system because still people are not feeling supported as they come forward. That is why we will continue to work properly. We will continue to respect the wishes of complainants to come forward to remain anonymous, but we will also ensure that there are proper processes in place to follow up whenever possible to ensure there are consequences.
Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's true unless you're a woman in uniform in the Canadian Armed Forces. The Prime Minister ignores those complaints. Look, the Prime Minister claims to be a feminist, claims to believe all women, claims to have zero tolerance for sexual misconduct, but he took zero action and left General Vance in charge of our military and in charge of Operation Honor for years after these allegations surfaced. If the Prime Minister's claims are actually true and he had known General Vance was accused of sexual misconduct in 2018, would he have fired him?
It is interesting to see the Conservatives continue to complain about a process that they themselves used in 2015. The leader of the official opposition, who was then the Associate Minister of Defence, had heard a rumour of misconduct, was the Minister of Veterans Affairs, told his staff, who told PMO and the Privy Council office. The job of politicians and their staff is to ensure that any allegation is given to appropriate authorities. The leader of the official opposition continues to decry a process that he himself undertook.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister had followed our process, he would have done like Stephen Harper did and sat down with General Vance and drilled him personally. Now, we have again that the Prime Minister fails to recognize that General Vance was in place during these investigations. We are calling for more accountability. The women and men who serve in uniform are calling for more accountability. We know that the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff lied to the Prime Minister and covered up these serious allegations about our top soldier. They oversaw an increase of $50,000 in salary to General Vance. They extended his contract. So again, if the Prime Minister's claims are true, and he had known General Vance was accused of sexual misconduct in 2018, would he have fired?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, we see that the Conservatives simply have no grasp of process or responsibility in this, because it is not the business of politicians to investigate or to create a process, to follow up on a process. It is the job and responsibility of politicians to ensure that independent, appropriate authorities follow up responsibly. And that's exactly what we ensured in this case when the Minister of National Defence forwarded that complaint and the ombudsman to the appropriate authorities, and they embarked on a process.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
At the end of the day, it is very clear that the Prime Minister knew about the allegations against General Vance. But what we want to know is, what is the Prime Minister going to do now? Right now, the message being sent to women in the Canadian Forces is, if you raise a complaint, and even if it makes it to the highest level, nothing gets done. That will send a chilling message to women across this country, and currently sends a message that women are not safe in the Canadian Forces. So what is the Prime Minister going to do? Will he let the minister that allowed this to happen remain? Will he bring in place some accountability? What will this Prime Minister do to protect women in the Canadian Forces?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, anyone who serves in our military and indeed works in any office or any workplace across this country deserves to have the supports and resources if they come forward with allegations or concerns, and indeed should be in a workplace free from harassment or intimidation or assault. That's why in Budget 2021, we announced over $236 million to eliminate sexual misconduct and gender-based violence in the CAF, including enhancing internal support services to survivors and implementing new external oversight mechanisms. And I can inform this House and all Canadians that we will be coming forward very soon with concrete plans on how we deliver exactly that.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
This year has been a very difficult year with the global pandemic of COVID-19, and it's been a very complex tax season for a lot of families. And we know that families who depend on benefits to keep food on the table and to pay their rent need to file their taxes, but they just need more time. The deadline is fast approaching. It's this Friday. So my direct question for the Prime Minister, will the Prime Minister extend the filing deadline for taxes so families can continue to get the support that they so desperately need?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic, CRA has been there to support Canadians, including delivering the CERB, recovery benefits, and the wage subsidy. And for this tax season, we're providing targeted interest relief to Canadians who received COVID-related income supports. They will not be required to pay interest on any outstanding income tax debt for the 2020 tax year until April 30th, 2022. We will continue to be there for Canadians who need support and get Canadians through this crisis.
The Honourable Member for London West.
Mr. Speaker, it's a harsh reality that cancer is the leading cause of disease-related death in Canadian children. Pediatric cancers are different from adult cancers. For one thing, they grow faster. One of my constituents, Kim Vanderscheld, has watched her daughter Olivia struggle with cancer for most of her life. Kim asked our government to do more for childhood cancer research. Can the Prime Minister tell us what the budget will do to support pediatric cancer research and help these brave children and their families?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for London West for all her work for her constituents, including her constituents, Olivia's parents, who I got to sit down with, who have been advocating a long time for this noble cause that affects far too many parents across the country. Budget 2021 proposes to provide $30 million over 2 years to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research to fund pediatric pediatric cancer research that can lead to better outcomes and healthier lives for these young patients. This funding will support promising research projects with the greatest potential for fighting pediatric cancers. Thank you to everyone who's advocated for this.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, we've seen the Prime Minister try and dodge answering questions today, and that's pretty consistent because we've heard from him that he doesn't like the facts. And when he hears the facts on CNN or sees them in the Globe and Mail or Post Media or in Global News' reporting, he calls it fake news. So if Canadians are expected to believe the Prime Minister that he didn't actually know, here's a very simple question. If the Prime Minister had been made aware of the allegations of sexual misconduct by General Vance, would he have fired him?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly important that there be a system and a set of resources for anyone who comes forward with allegations of misconduct or sexual harassment, and it is incredibly important that processes be followed in that situation. When the Ombudsman came forward with allegations, we pushed forward, the Defence Minister ensured that those allegations were directed to the appropriate authorities who had the capacity to follow up on a process. It is important, Mr. Speaker, that women be believed, and it's important that there be a process, and that's what we will always ensure.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The Ombudsman was crystal clear with the Defence Minister that the allegations were about sexual misconduct perpetrated by the Chief of the Defence Staff on one of his subordinates. And that information was given to the Prime Minister's office, and he failed to act. We hear a lot about ministerial accountability from this government, and now we're hearing about systems that they might implement someday. 3 years after this complaint was made, and after they gave a raise and extended the contract, and then gave a high five to the perpetrator on his way out the door. So, who is this Prime Minister going to hold accountable? Who is he going to fire?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly important that there be proper process in all these situations. Yes, we need to create the support and the resources there for anyone who comes forward, who has the courage to come forward and push back against a terrible toxic culture that has gone on for far too long in many institutions, including the Canadian Armed Forces. But we also need to ensure that that process can follow through. In this case, the Ombudsman was unable to provide further information to the people responsible for the process.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
There was a process, and it was exercised by the victim. She brought her complaints forward, and this Prime Minister failed her. He failed to act. His office was made aware exactly of these allegations, that they were sexual in nature. And then he promoted the perpetrator. He extended his contract. He gave him a raise. No action was taken. So if this Prime Minister is to be believed, and that he did not know, and that means that the Minister of National Defence or his Chief of Staff perpetrated a cover-up, who is he going to fire?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, this is the same process that was used by the then Conservative government in 2015. The Leader of the Official Opposition heard a rumour of misconduct, told his staff, who told PMO and the Privy Council office. It is the job of politicians and their staff to ensure any allegation is given to the appropriate authorities. They put forward that process in the same way that we did. The difference is they ended up appointing the individual Chief of Defence Staff.
Honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, let's talk about leadership. Prime Minister Harper heard a rumour, had the head of CSIS investigated, and then had the courage to sit down, look the general in the eye, and ask him questions about it. What did this Prime Minister do? He hid behind his Chief of Staff and the Minister of National Defence. He did nothing. And the difference between Prime Minister Harper and this Prime Minister, among many, Prime Minister Harper was presented with evidence, was presented with a rumour, and this Prime Minister was presented with evidence and did nothing. Who is he going to fire for this failure to these women in the Canadian Forces?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Prime Minister Harper was presented with a rumour and still appointed him in appointing them. And the process involved in politicians checking with their buddies, checking with individuals to see whether or not they should move forward or not is not a process at all, Mr. Speaker. And it actually proves the entire point that the system that we have right now is inadequate to support women and men who come forward with serious allegations regarding misconduct in the military. That is why, Mr. Speaker, we are moving forward with much stronger measures to change the culture in the military and support every survivor.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is suddenly and unexpectedly impassioned about Quebec's interests. But where was that passion for Quebec when Quebec was asking for health transfers in the budget? Where was it when seniors got nothing if they're under 75? We've given him the solution. We've made the calls he didn't make. We've proposed solutions so that the Port of Montreal can operate tomorrow morning. All that is required is to apply those solutions. Why isn't he doing so? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government has always taken action to support Canadians and Quebecers. We've transferred billions of dollars to help out with the healthcare system in Quebec and the provinces during this pandemic. And yes, after the pandemic's over, we will sit down and we will talk about doing even more together. We were there for our seniors with transfers, with help during the pandemic. We increased the OAS by 10% for older seniors. We are there to help people, and we will be there to get the Port of Montreal up and running again so that the economy of Quebec can too. The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Let's remember the railway crisis a year ago, and the question was, is there a problem with leadership in Canada? And we found the solution. We implemented the solution. So Quebec doesn't want back-to-work legislation. They want people to go back to work more quickly, and our solution will do that quicker. But by delaying, the Prime Minister is working against the economy of Quebec, the will of Quebec, and the workers of Quebec. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I wouldn't like to contradict the Bloc leader when he says he speaks on behalf of Quebec, but I did hear quite clearly from Premier Legault that he did want us to move forward to get work back up and running in the Port of Montreal and to unblock the Quebec economy. That's precisely what we've done. We are making sure that there is mediation and arbitration that's neutral, impartial, so that things can move forward, everyone is respected, and we can ensure the security and the prosperity of the Quebec economy.
Aurora Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, what you permit is what you promote. The Prime Minister is the most powerful man in the country. Rather than standing for women in the face of serious allegations of misconduct against General Vance, the Prime Minister has reinforced an entrenched and toxic military culture. His inaction has emboldened the military old boys and denied women the opportunity to be believed. If the PM had known about the allegations against General Vance, would he have removed him?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly important that we create a system that we don't have at this point. Even with all the improvements that have been made, we need to ensure that anyone who has been affected by misconduct, by sexual assault, by harassment, is able to come forward in all comfort and engage in a proper process that will lead to consequences. We simply do not have that right now, Mr. Speaker, and we have worked very hard to ensure that there are processes in place, but we know there is more to do, and we will be announcing more extremely shortly.
The honourable member for Aurora Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister stated that his office, like him, takes sexual harassment extraordinarily seriously. But Katie Telford did not take the misconduct allegations against General Vance seriously. If she had, she would have informed the Prime Minister. Only he can replace a chief of the defense staff, not unelected members of his office. His staff made him complicit in the misconduct, denying him the opportunity to act. If the PM's staff hadn't kept him in the dark about the allegations against General Vance, would he have removed him?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of our time in office back in 2015, we have always taken seriously the responsibility to change cultures, both in the armed forces and in government and across this country when it comes to supporting survivors of sexual harassment and assault in terms of creating better processes for it. That's why Katie Telford herself has sat down with many members of women senior military leaders to talk about the changes needed and has included me in many of those conversations. We will continue to work hard every single day to transform the old boys culture in the military and better support survivors.
The Honourable Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
But, Mr. Speaker, there are only two possible truths in the case of allegations of sexual misconduct against General Vance. Either the Prime Minister knew, did nothing, and allowed abuse of power at the highest levels to continue unchecked, or his staff didn't inform him and his rhetoric about taking allegations of sexual harassment seriously is simply untrue. The process is that all roads lead to the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister had known about the allegations, would he have removed General Vance?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the member opposite is not being forward with the truth. We heard from allegations, we heard clearly from testimony at committee when the Deputy Secretary of Cabinet testified that she did not have information even about the nature of the complaint. The former Ombudsman could not provide any details. He took the investigation as far as he could with the...
I'm just going to stop the Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'm having a hard time hearing him. There's some bantering going back and forth. I'll let him start over if you don't mind. I just want to remind the honourable members that we all want to hear the questions and the answers.
Mr. Speaker, at committee, there were hearings from multiple witnesses for 3 months, including nonpartisan public service, who made clearly known that the details of the allegation were unknown. The Deputy Secretary of Cabinet testified that she did not have information even about the nature of the complaint or specifics that would have enabled further action. The former Ombudsman testified at committee that he couldn't provide any details. He took the investigation as far as he could with the complainant's authority. It is important to support complainants in their desire for privacy, but it is also important that we create better systems in which they will feel properly supported.
The Honourable Member for Brampton North.
Mr. Speaker, many of my Brampton North constituents are concerned about the third wave of the pandemic. Across Ontario, hospitals are filling up, new cases continue to exceed 3,000 per day, and additional help is needed. I know that this federal government has often said what is needed is a Team Canada approach to addressing this pandemic. Can the Prime Minister please tell this House what actions the Government of Canada has recently taken to provide support to the people of Ontario during this pandemic?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to begin by thanking the member for Brampton North for her leadership during this difficult time. I want to reassure all Canadians that we will always be there to provide assistance to provinces and territories. Just this week, we approved a request to deploy immediate support to Ontario through deployment of the Canadian Armed Forces and redeployment of the Canadian Red Cross. Over the course of this pandemic, we have now approved 70 requests for assistance, including 22 from Ontario. We will continue to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to help Canadians get through this COVID-19 pandemic.
L'honorable député de Charbonneau.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the email shows clearly on March 2nd, 2018 that there were sexual harassment allegations against General Vance, but the Prime Minister says he wasn't aware. Even if his senior officials, his minister and his own chief of staff were aware, the Prime Minister said he didn't know. If he had known, would he have sacked General Vance? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, that email from the Chief of Staff's assistant In her testimony before the committee, she said, "I didn't even have any information about the nature of the complaint or the details that would have made it possible to take further steps." Mr. Speaker, we followed a process in this situation. We always need to assiduously comply with the procedures in cases of complaints like this, and clearly the system has to be improved to better support victims in the future. The honourable member for Charlebourg, Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I knew about the processes when I was in the forces, and I know that if I was still there, if this happened, the person would have been fired. The Prime Minister talks about procedure and paper and email. Did he know or didn't he know that there was a sexual harassment complaint against General Vance? And if so, would he have fired him? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I've said this many times. I wasn't aware of the nature of the allegations against General Vance. My office and the Minister of Defense forwarded that complaint, put it into a regular process, the same process that the Conservative government used before 2015, in order to ensure that there was proper follow-up on the complaint. Unfortunately, the system wasn't sound enough to serve the complainant in this case, but we will improve the system. The honourable member for Charlebourg, Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, someone said nobody knew it was a Me Too complaint. We didn't have information on the nature of the complaint, of the allegation. Who said that? Well, obviously it was the Prime Minister. His office, documents obtained by Global News show that his office asked bureaucrats to open a probe and were informed that the allegation was about sexual harassment. If the Prime Minister maintains his claim that he didn't know, I'd like to know, if he had known, would he have fired General Vance? This is the umpteenth time we've asked this question. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, each time I'm answering that we need to have a sound process to base such decisions on. Unfortunately, in this situation, the process, which was the same process that the Conservative government followed previously, they're the ones who chose General Vance as Chief of the Defence Staff. Unfortunately, that process didn't produce results. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where we have to recognize and greatly improve the system, and that's precisely what we're going to do. The honourable member for Longueuil, Charlemagne. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on all Canadians, particularly students and young people. The economic recovery of our country depends on the ability of young Canadians and students to continue their studies and acquire the work experience they need to start their careers. I'm very happy that so many jobs will be created thanks to an investment of over $2 million under the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Can the Prime Minister inform the House what efforts have been made to support young Canadians? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like to thank the member for Longueuil-Charlemagne for her tireless advocacy on behalf of our young people. Since the start of the pandemic, we've provided over $7.4 billion in support for young Canadians. In Budget 2021, we're injecting an additional $5.7 billion to alleviate student debt and create new training and job opportunities. Today, we announced a record number of jobs, 150,000 of them, are now available through Summer Jobs Canada, which means even more opportunities for young Canadians than ever before.
Burnaby South. L'Université
Laurentian University is essential to Northern Ontario, particularly for Indigenous communities and Francophones. But at this point in time, Laurentian University is in a full-blown crisis, and the Liberals are leaving them to their own devices. Northern communities deserve better. Will the Prime Minister take action to save Laurentian University? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, the NDP leader is showing that he doesn't understand anything about federal, provincial jurisdiction. We are following the situation closely. We're in direct contact with the province on this matter. Our thoughts are with all those who've lost their jobs and all employees and students who are going through this difficult situation. We will continue to support post-secondary educational institutions because the future of our young people and our country depends on that. We're willing to work with the provinces and territories to get there because this is a matter that comes under their jurisdiction. That's all the time we have today for question period.
Question period. Notice there's a few points of order to be raised to the honourable member for Hamilton East Stony Creek. No? Okay. Might want to put your hand down. Alors, nous avons un autre, we have another point of order, the honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you seek it, I believe you will find unanimous consent for the following motion. That in the opinion of the House, the government should introduce legislation and work with provincial and territorial governments and Indigenous peoples to ensure that a guaranteed livable basic income, 1, accounting for regional differences in living costs, 2, for all Canadians over the age of 18, including single persons, students, families, seniors, persons with disabilities, temporary foreign workers, permanent residents, and refugee claimants. 3, paid on a regular basis. 4, not requiring participation in the labor market, education, or training in order to be eligible. 5, in addition to current and future government public services and income supports meant to meet special, exceptional, and other distinct needs and goals rather than basic needs, including accessible, affordable social housing and expanded health services, be established on an ongoing and permanent basis in a concerted effort to eradicate poverty and ensure the respect, dignity, and security of all persons in respect of Canada's domestic and international legal obligations.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Oh, we don't have unanimous consent, I'm afraid. Un autre rappel au règlement, l'honorable.
Another point of order. The honourable member for Longueuil Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, there have been consultations between the recognized parties, and I believe you will find unanimous consent to the following motion. That, following the allegations of psychological abuse, neglect, sexual harassment, and racial discrimination of 5 former members of the Canada Artistic Swimming Senior National Team by coaches and staff, the House recognized that national sports organizations are environments which, due in particular to the extremely intense competitive atmosphere and the presence of coaches with authority over the athletes, present a risk of psychological abuse and harassment, neglect, sexual harassment, and discrimination. Recognize that it is the responsibility of the government to do everything in its power to protect our high-performance athletes from situations of abuse and harassment, and that the ethical foundations of Sport Canada's strategy on ethical sport be respected. And ask the Standing Committee of Canadian Heritage to undertake a study on the establishment of an independent body for handling complaints in sport, which will establish a climate of trust so that victims can report without fear of reprisals.
Que tous ceux qui s'opposent à ce que l'on...
All those against the honourable members moving the motion, please say nay. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those who are against the motion will please say nay. Carried.
I understand we have a question of privilege. The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on a question of privilege to address misleading comments made in the House by the Prime Minister. At the heart of the issue is the Prime Minister's denial that he was unaware in 2018 that the matter of the allegations of sexual misconduct against General Vance was a matter of a Me Too complaint. I have evidence that will demonstrate that this is a false statement. Further, the facts clearly indicate that the Prime Minister had to have known of the situation and therefore deliberately misled this House. Boston Gagnon at page 82 states that it is a contempt of the House for a member to deliberately attempt to mislead the House or a committee by way of statement, evidence, or petition. During question period yesterday, the Prime Minister said, Mr. Speaker, as I have been saying for some time now, yes, there was a complaint against General Vance. Nobody in my office or in the Minister of National Defence's office knew the nature of the complaint, unquote. Then he goes on to say, quote, Mr. Speaker, what the Leader of the Opposition is putting forward is simply untrue. While there was awareness that there was a complaint against General Vance, there was no awareness that it was, in fact, a Me Too complaint of a sexual nature, unquote. Mr. Speaker, I have emails on this matter internal to the Privy Council office from Janine Sherman, Deputy Secretary to Cabinet for Appointments, to various political staff in the Minister of Defence's office and the Prime Minister's office that I would be happy to hand over to you, Mr. Speaker. I will refer to a few of these emails, beginning with one from Janine Sherman, where she proposed transmittal language from the Minister to the Ombudsman dated March 2nd, 2018. This is what she wrote. Dear Mr. Walburn, I am further writing to our discussion concerning allegations of sexual harassment that were brought to your attention. As the allegations relate to a Governor and Council appointee, I would ask that you to please transmit the information to Ms. Janine Sherman, Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet for the Senior Personnel Secretariat, Privy Council Office, and provide her with your full cooperation, unquote. March 5th, 2018, email from Ms. Sherman to Mr. Walburn. The first paragraph is blacked out, but I will quote. I understand that you have information concerning the conduct of a GIC appointee that the Minister asked that you share with me. Here, Mr. Speaker, is another redaction. But, and then I'll continue, but given the sensitivity of this matter, if it is at all possible to speak today or at your earliest convenience, I will make myself available, unquote. There is also an email from Mr. Sherman dated March 2nd, 2018. The recipient, Mr. Speaker, is blacked out, that says, on behalf of the Minister, I am writing further to your discussion concerning allegations of sexual harassment that have been brought to your attention, unquote. Ms. Sherman confirmed that these email exchanges were with political staff in her testimony to the Committee on National Defense dated March 26, 2021. Ms. Sherman is recorded in the committee's evidence as saying, and I quote, those redactions are done on the basis of the statutory requirement in the Privacy Act and the Access to Information Act, so public servants' names are not redacted. For non-public servants, that does constitute personal information, and that is the reason it is redacted. In the interest of being helpful, I could indicate in a generic way that these interactions were between myself and the people in the Prime Minister's office, unquote. The Prime Minister's statements in the House, which predates Ms. Sherman's testimony of March 26, confirm her version of the events stated above. The Prime Minister stated during question period on March 10th, I quote, Mr. Speaker, my office was aware of the Minister's direction to the Ombudsman to follow up with appropriate authorities, but my office and I learned of the details of the allegation over the past months only. And then on March 24th, he said, Mr. Speaker, allegations of sexual misconduct or inappropriate behavior need to be followed up by the appropriate authorities, and that is exactly what happened in this case. That was the Prime Minister speaking, Mr. Speaker, on March 24th. He said, and I'm going to repeat that, allegations of sexual misconduct. He even said it. And then I'm going to go on to what he continued to say. The Ombudsman was directed towards the right people in terms of following up on an investigation. The Ombudsperson was not able to share further information with the investigators, and therefore the investigation did not move forward. We'll continue to take very seriously any allegations that come forward, as we always have, unquote. Ms. Sherman confirmed she had these discussions specifically with staff in the Prime Minister's office later in her testimony before committee. Here's what she said. As a matter of course, Madam Chair, in my responsibilities, I would not make a decision alone in that respect. I did meet with Mr. Walburn myself. After that discussion, I would have briefed up to the people who had been involved in the discussion to pursue and try to get more information about the generality of the complaint. I would have done a follow-up in terms of certainly the clerk, unquote. Later, in response to a question from the member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman on whether the information was shared with the clerk of the Privy Council and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, she said, and I'll quote again, I have shared information to say it was within the Prime Minister's office. The emails from Ms. Sherman outline this, and that's the quote. The emails from Ms. Sherman outline the substance of the information that she was discussing with staff in the Prime Minister's office. Addressing the Prime Minister's assertion that no one in the Defence Minister's office was aware of the nature of the complaint. Gary Walburn's testimony to the Standing Committee on National Defence from March 3rd states the following. He said the investigation process inexplicably moved at a snail's pace until March 2018, which just so happened to be the time when I personally met with Minister Sajan, to address an allegation of inappropriate sexual behavior within the senior ranks of the Canadian Armed Forces, specifically against the Chief of the Defence Staff, and to discuss my concerns about this allegation. To conclude my statement, I will say that yes, I did meet with on March 1st, 2018, and yes, I did directly tell him about an allegation of inappropriate sexual behavior made against the Chief of the Defence Staff, unquote. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there's Michael Wernick's testimony at the Standing Committee on National Defence on April 6th, replying to another question from the member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman regarding the allegations being that of a sexual misconduct nature. Mr. Wernick said, I don't have the language of the emails in front of me. I think the language was potential sexual harassment. There is a back and forth of emails between Zita, Janine, and Elder. I certainly would say that it was in the realm of sexual misconduct or sexual harassment, but I couldn't speak to the exact language. Also, as to whether the Prime Minister's statements about his office should extend to PCO, Wernick had this to offer, which appropriately places PCO as responsible to the Prime Minister. He said the Privy Council office is the Prime Minister's department. It is a part of the executive branch of the government. It is the Prime Minister's department, and the Prime Minister is the minister, just like any other department. And the clerk is the deputy minister, just like any other department. It's not independent in the sense of the courts, but it is separate from Minister of Defense. I guess that's the argument he was making. It was somebody from outside, unquote. Mr. Wernick later responded to a question from the member for Renfrew, Mississippi, and Pembroke as to why Elder had gone to the clerk instead of NSA, and Mr. Wernick explained. That would be because I'm the boss of the Prime Minister's department. That would have been going right to the top and saying, we have this very serious issue the minister wants to look into. What's the best way to proceed? On February 1st, 2002, the Speaker then ruled on a matter regarding the former Minister of National Defence. The Honourable former member for Portage Lisgar, now our current Premier in Manitoba, alleged that the Minister of National Defence deliberately misled the House as to when he knew that prisoners taken by Canadian JTF-2 troops in Afghanistan had been handed over to the Americans. In support of that allegation, he cited the Minister's responses in question period on 2 successive days. The Speaker considered the matter and found that there was a prima facie question of privilege. He said, the authorities are consistent about the need for clarity in our proceedings and about the need to ensure the integrity of the information provided by the government to the House. The authorities, Mr. Speaker, to which Speaker Milliken was referring to include, but are not limited to, the following: House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 2nd edition, which states on page 115, misleading a minister or a member has also been considered a form of obstruction and thus a prima facie breach of privilege. Mr. Speaker, on February 25, 2014, the House Leader of the official opposition raised a question of privilege regarding statements made in the House by the member for Mississauga-Streetsville. The honourable member for Mississauga-Streetsville had deliberately misled the House during debate on C-23, the Fair Elections Act, when he stated that he had witnessed evidence of voter fraud firsthand. He further argued that the matter was not resolved by the statements made by the member for Mississauga-Streetsville later on February 24th and 25th, where he admitted that contrary to his original claim, he had not actually witnessed what he had originally claimed to have witnessed. In the Speaker's view, this was not a simple case of someone misspeaking. He argued rather that it was a case where the member deliberately chose to take something he knew not to be true and present it as eyewitness evidence, something so egregious it constituted contempt. On March 3rd, the Speaker delivered his ruling and found the matter to be a prima facie question of privilege. On November 3rd, 1978, the member for North Cumberland-Durham raised a question of privilege and charged that he had been deliberately misled by a former Solicitor General. The member had written a letter in 1973 to the Solicitor General who assured him that as a matter of policy, the RCMP did not intercept the private mail of Canadians. On November 1st, 1978, during testimony before the MacDonald Commission, the former commissioner of the RCMP stated they did indeed intercept mail on a very restricted basis and that the practice was not one that had been concealed from ministers. The Speaker ruled on December 6, 1978, that this was indeed a prima facie of contempt. On the final analysis, Mr. Speaker, does this meet the test for a prima facie question of privilege? The evidence above does clearly establish that the Prime Minister provided information that was misleading. There's no doubt about that. So the first test is met. On the second test, did the Prime Minister know that the information he provided was false? Well, on March 10th, in questions from the official opposition, the Prime Minister specifically had to address the awareness of members of his office, Elder Marquez, and his department, Michael Warnick and Janine Sherman, and the Defence Minister. The Prime Minister's answer included the following. The Ombudsman came forward with allegations. The Minister said he needed to take those to the independent authorities able to follow up on this investigation, and that is something my office was aware of. Now, Mr. Speaker, Gary Walburn's statement of March 3rd to the Standing Committee on National Defence details specifically that the allegations brought forth were sexual in nature. The testimony predates this statement by the Prime Minister by a full week. This was followed on March 11th in response to a question in the House. The Prime Minister named members of the Prime Minister's staff, as I said, Elder Marquez and his department, Michael Warnick and Janine Sherman, and the Defence Minister as having personal knowledge of the nature of the complaints. In that exchange, the Defence Minister speaks directly to his knowledge of the substance of the allegations and the actions he took with regards to it. There is a strong case that the second test is met. On the third test, was the Prime Minister intending to mislead the House? Well, the Prime Minister's answers on this matter have repeatedly changed, not only in the press but in the House. They have gone from not being aware of allegations to not being aware of specific allegations to his office being aware. But the public statement issued to the media by the Prime Minister's office on February 23, 2021, and published in its entirety by Mercedes Stephenson states the following, and I quote, "The Prime Minister confirmed on March 10th in the House of Commons that his office was aware of the concerns raised by the Defence Ombudsman in 2018. That means that the Prime Minister has issued a public statement," and I unquote, so I'll go back. That was the quote. That means, though, that the Prime Minister has issued a public statement prior to his statement in this House that his office was aware, as the Defence Minister has stated, that he raised concerns of a sexual nature regarding the Chief of the Defence Staff. In the face of a public statement by the Prime Minister which contradicts the statement made yesterday here in the House of Commons, there is an argument that the third test has been met. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, it is just not believable that the Prime Minister was unaware that these allegations were of a Me Too complaint, of a Me Too sexual complaint nature. Now, let's remember, this was in 2018, Mr. Speaker, at the height of the Me Too movement, the very height of it. It was also during this period that allegations surfaced that the Prime Minister had inappropriately groped a young newspaper reporter. In addition, sitting on the Prime Minister's desk for 3 years was a report from former Supreme Court Justice Marie Deschamps that categorized the culture in the military as sexualized. In Majon's second edition of Parliamentary Procedure in Canada, at page 227, it states, in the final analysis and areas of doubt, the Speaker asks simply, does the act complained of appear at first sight to be a breach of privilege, or to put it shortly, has the member an arguable point? If the Speaker feels any doubt on the question, he should leave it to the House. In this House, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is being accused of something very serious, something that should not be treated lightly or dismissed as a matter of experiencing something differently. Let's not forget who we're dealing with here. We are dealing with a Prime Minister who has frequently breached our ethics laws. I'm, of course, referring to the SNC-Lavalin scandal. The Prime Minister whose family vacation on Millionaire Island and the investigation about his family ties to the We Charity. All things considered, Mr. Speaker, I believe I have more than an arguable point. If you rule on this matter to be a prima facie question of privilege, I am prepared to move the appropriate motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I want to thank the honourable member for her submission, and I will take it under advisement and return to the House. We have a point of order. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you would allow us some time, we'd like to come back with some comments to this point of privilege.
Good. L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for La Prairie. I just wanted to say, Mr. Speaker, that we would like to take a day or two to formulate some comments and to respond to this point of privilege.
C'est bon. Nous avons d'autres.
Very good. We have other points of order.
Points of order. The honourable member for Esquimalt Saanich Sooke is rising on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the same point of privilege, I would like to make some initial remarks. And it's obviously true that misleading the House is always a serious matter. And any instance of misleading the House by a minister, or in this case by the Prime Minister, would clearly affect our ability as members to do our job as parliamentarians. In this case, the answer to the question of what the Prime Minister knew about the allegations against the former Chief of Defence Staff is critical to the larger issue of this government's failure to investigate allegations of sexual misconduct against the former Chief of Defence Staff, and then allowing him to stay in charge of Operation Honour, a program to combat sexual misconduct in the Canadian Forces, for another 3 years. Knowing whether the Prime Minister was aware of the nature of the allegations against Vance is critical to our power as parliamentarians to hold the government accountable. This case of misleading the House may constitute obstruction, as previous speakers have found to be the case in other instances of misleading the House. Obstructing what? The obstruction would be in allowing members to determine who was responsible for this government's failure to act on allegations of sexual misconduct at the highest level